evening, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I am Sandy Schoelles, and here is Jennifer Hynes. How are you, Jen?
I'm doing
Woo! How
great
are you?
tonight. I'm so
Good.
excited about our topic tonight because we've been wanting to talk about global dimming and all
Oh,
of
yeah.
that for a long time. And we finally have some good articles to
We
kind of
finally
take,
do.
uh,
Yeah, we
understand the
finally
issue
do.
and what's going on.
So, what's been going on with you? Obviously, you're not watching the Super Bowl. We're not watching the Stupid Bowl. No.
Nope, I did not watch the stupid bowl, the Super Bowl. I'm
Nope,
not
nope, nope,
really, I
nope.
have to confess, I'm not really a big football fan, you
No.
know.
My
It's just
family's
not my
watching,
thing.
but
Everybody has their thing. It's not my thing.
yeah, my family's watching, but I'm not. And obviously, because I'd rather be doing this with you. Yes, I
Mm.
would. So
Any day of the
let's
week.
any day of the week. So we've got our chat with us, and we'll say hi to everybody, and thank you for liking the graphics. Yes, I'm becoming a. I don't know what's
You
happening. I'm
are.
learning stuff in my old friggin'
Sandy,
age.
you're so good,
All right,
man.
so
I'm just
listen,
so
guys.
excited about what you're up to these days.
Yeah, me too.
You're really
I'm
good.
very excited. But anyway, Raza, Karen, everyone that's joining us, great. We've got Facebook and YouTube tonight, and our topics are. I'm just going to start, and then I'm going to let Jennifer do what Jennifer does best, and she goes over the information, and um, we're going to talk about we're going to call it global dimming, but you'll see in the articles they very rarely use that term. But it's
Yeah.
really interesting, and this new study that came out, which is what we're going to talk about. So take it away, Jen. And Jen, would you like me to play my new sound effect?
Yeah.
This is our sound effect for us. This is our sound effect saying yay, but it's yay! Take it
That is
away,
so
because
funny.
that's where we're ending up going. So we start with a little laugh. There you go. All right, Jen.
All
So
right.
take it away. Ba-doom boom.
Absolutely. So, as we said before, we're going to be talking about, first of all, aerosol particles and global dimming. And everybody has been wondering, how has the COVID lockdown been affecting things all the way through? Obviously the CO2 is going down, but other things are happening too. And, what's the lay of the land? So we're going to go through that. Our first article today is going to be from phys.org, and it's COVID-19 lockdowns temporarily raised global temperatures. Now, if you didn't know about global dimming, you wouldn't expect that. It's very
Right.
interesting.
Uh-oh.
And that one is actually pretty much brand new. That's February 2nd, Groundhog Day. Happy
Sorry.
Groundhog Day, everybody. And then we have one
Yes.
from the end of January, also from phys.org. So this has been a topic that's been in the froth and foment, right? Aerosol particles cool the
Yeah.
climate less than we thought. So we're going to talk about how they made those measurements and what are the limitations of those measurements they made from our point of view. And then the last one that we're going to talk about with global dimming and all that is from the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, why lockdown had little to no effect on global temperatures. So one says that it got hotter, one says it didn't get, didn't have any effect, and then this one says it didn't have very much effect. Now, this last one, just to be clear, is from
Mm-hmm.
October 22nd,
Yep.
2020. So that's like 3.5 months ago. So we didn't really have all that much data. So we'll focus primarily on those three things with global dimming. And then we're going to take a deep dive into the Arctic with an article from vice.com. Scientists
Mm-hmm.
in the Arctic ice factory found a worrying sign of climate change. And this is going to be about the Laptev Sea. And then last but not least, from the Barents Observer, y'all remember we've been reporting on this big diesel tank rupture up in Norilsk, and the
Mm-hmm.
company is Nornickel. Nornickel must pay
Girls.
1.62 billion euros for its huge oil spill on the Arctic tundra. So that's our show for today, guys.
Yeah, and it's a good one. It's a good one. So
It is.
Jennifer, as we were
Yeah.
reading, it is controversial in a way because if you use those words global dimming, people freak out. But it it's
Yeah,
it's it's
exactly.
it the science is coming out and we're
It
going to
is.
see this more and more. So why don't you start out with the FizzOrg and
Sure.
COVID-19 lockdowns, and I will patiently listen and learn.
All right. Okay, guys, let's take off. So, this guy who wrote this first article we're going to talk about, he works for the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So, methinks he knows of what he talks. And
Yes.
it's not very long. I'm just going to read it through so we get all the facts and then a little discussion. The lockdowns and reduced societal activity related to the COVID-19 pandemic affected emissions of pollutants in ways that slightly warmed the planet for several months last year, according to new research led by the National Center for Atmospheric Research, affectionately known as NCAR. The counterintuitive finding highlights the influence of airborne particles, or aerosols, that block incoming sunlight. When emissions of aerosols dropped last spring, more of the sun's warmth reached the planet, especially in the heavily industrialized nations, such as the United States and Russia, that normally pump high amounts of aerosols into the atmosphere. Quote, there was a big decline in emissions from the most polluting industries, and that had immediate short-term effects on temperature, said NCAR scientist. Pollution cools the planet, so it makes sense that pollution reductions would warm the planet. So that's counterintuitive, right? Temperatures over parts of the Earth's land surface last spring were about 0.2 to 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit, or 0.1 to 0.3 degrees Celsius, warmer than would have been expected with prevailing weather conditions, the study found. The effect was most pronounced in regions that normally are associated with substantial emissions of aerosols, with the warming reaching about 0.7 height over much of the United States and Russia. The new study highlights the complex and often conflicting influences of different types of emissions from power plants, motor vehicles, industrial facilities, and other sources. While aerosols tend to brighten clouds and reflect heat from the sun back into space, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases have the opposite effect, trapping heat near the planet's surface and elevating temperatures. Despite the short-term warming effects, Gettleman emphasized that the long-term impact of the pandemic may be to slightly slow climate change because of the reduced emissions of carbon dioxide, which lingers in the atmosphere for decades and has a more gradual influence on climate. In contrast, aerosols, the focus of the new study, have a more immediate impact that fades away within a few years, because they fall out. The study was published in the Geophysical Research Letters. It was funded by the National Science Foundation and NCAR's sponsor. Let's jump down. Teasing out the impacts. Although scientists have long been able to quantify the warming impacts of carbon dioxide, the climate influence of several types of aerosols, including sulfates, nitrates, black carbon, and dust, has been more difficult to pin down. One of the major challenges for projecting the extent of future climate change is estimating the extent to which society will continue to emit aerosols in the future and the influence of the different types of aerosols on clouds and temperature. Clouds are coming up again as another really big topic to really understand all the fine points and how it affects climate. That's my interjection. To conduct the research, These scientists used two of the world's leading climate models, the NCAR-based Community Earth System model and a model known as ECamm, HAMAS, which was developed by a consortium of European nations. They ran simulations on both models, adjusting emissions of aerosols and incorporating actual meteorological conditions in 2020, such as winds. This approach enabled them to identify the impact of reduced emissions on temperature changes that were too small to tease out in actual observations, where they could be obscured by the variability in atmospheric conditions. The results showed that warming effect was strongest in the mid and upper latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere. The effect was mixed in the tropics and comparatively minor in much of the Southern Hemisphere, where aerosol emissions are not as pervasive. This study will help scientists better understand the influence of various types of aerosols in different atmospheric conditions, helping to inform efforts to minimize climate change. Although the research illustrates how aerosols counter the warming influence of greenhouse gases, he emphasized that emitting more of them in the lower atmosphere is not a viable strategy for slowing climate change. Aerosol emissions have major health ramifications. Saying that we should pollute is not practical. So
No,
that's
of course not.
quite a thought. But,
Yeah.
I find it. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say when the numbers are looked at and they're tiny, to a layperson, they might be tiny, tiny 0.1 to zero point 0.3, I mean zero point 0.1 Celsius. To somebody might say, well, what does that matter? But it matters a
Yeah, well,
lot.
it does. I mean, it doesn't sound like very much, but in such a short period of time, when you consider that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, Earth has, and it's debatable exactly how much, but Earth has warmed over a degree Celsius in that time. Now, some people say 1.2, it's debatable, but
Right.
it's warmed between a degree and 2 degrees since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, roughly in the last 200 years. That's the measurement we generally take. So if you think about that, and then think about this is in a 1 year period, effectively, that they're measuring. We've been locked down about a year in the world at large. And so if it has changed that much in a year, and then you compare that to 200 years, the change is actually monolithic. It's actually really, really huge. A third of a degree Celsius is huge. I can remember when we started talking about climate change, me personally, about 7 or 8 years ago. And at that time, the measurement was 0.8 degrees Celsius. Now they're saying it's increased in the cities, in the mid to upper latitudes in the Northern Hemisphere. We have to qualify all those things.
Yes.
Third of a degree Celsius in the last year. And then you compare a degree in the last 200 years, then you can really start to see the impact, right?
Yes, it's heavy. It's more than people
It's
realize.
heavy.
The lay person, I mean, people aren't interested, but this is such important information. It really is.
It really
It's
is.
completely.
It
But
really
yet
is.
the researchers, there's the variation in the interpretations also, and that's why the next article we put into the mix. Do you want to go for that one?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm going to bring that one up, guys, and we're going to show you this
Okay.
next one because we have a lot to cover, and in our research, we're finding this stuff that seemingly might be same publication, might be butting heads, But this is how things are
Well,
learned.
maybe, maybe not. I don't think it's
Right.
butting heads. You
No,
know, I
doesn't
mean, you
seem like
look
it.
at the bigger picture and
Mm-hmm.
understand how they did this next study, and that it focuses pretty much exclusively on something called ship trails, the trails of carbon dioxide
Yep.
ships leave as they go through the bright blue ocean, right? So this
Yeah.
first one was about land, right? This one's about ships and sea. So but so this it's very interesting though. So this one came out January 28th. Again, phys.org. Aerosol particles cool the climate less than we thought.
Yeah. And that makes
So
you think, oh, that's contrary to what this new article we just read said, but it's
yeah,
the
but you
nature of
have to take
research.
all the factors into consideration.
Yes.
The
Okay.
impact of atmospheric aerosols on clouds and climate may be different than previously thought. That is the conclusion of cloud researcher, I'm not going to attempt the name, from TU Delft. The results of her study will be published in Science on Friday, January 29th. This is when this article came out. Cloud decks cover vast stretches of subtropical oceans. So they were talking before about the mid and upper latitudes. Now they're talking about subtropical oceans, very different area on land or on Earth, not on land. It's actually in the ocean. They cool the planet because they reflect incoming sunlight back into space. Air pollution in the form of aerosols, particles suspended in the atmosphere, can increase this cooling effect because it makes clouds brighter. That's what Peter Wadhams is always talking about. He wants to do marine cloud brightening because that reflects more sunlight. The cooling effect of pollution offsets part of the warming effect of greenhouse gases. How much exactly is one of the largest uncertainties faced by climate scientists. Ship tracks. A striking illustration of clouds becoming brighter as a result of aerosols is provided by shipping emissions in the form of ship tracks. These are visible as bright lines within a cloud deck that reveal the paths of polluting ships that travel beneath the clouds. Such ship tracks are good examples of how aerosol effect on clouds are traditionally thought of and how they are still represented in most climate models. But according to the cloud researcher, ship tracks do not tell the whole story. Quote, the problem is the clouds get brighter at first, but after a while, they start to get thinner and thus less bright again. And ship tracks disappear before we can observe this dimming effect. It's kind of like contrails, same thing with ships in a certain sort of way.
Yeah.
To figure
Mm-hmm.
out the climate effect of air pollution in general, which is much more persistent than fleeting ship tracks, she asked her colleagues not to rely on ship track observations. Instead, they created an extensive data set of detailed cloud simulations. At the heart of their study, the researchers designed a clever new way to compare their simulated cloud decks to satellite snapshots. Such snapshots contain information about aerosol effect on clouds all over the globe, but so far have been hard to interpret. See, it's brainy stuff. It's not like obvious. There are a lot of factors. Overestimation. Our conclusion is that the cooling effect of aerosols on clouds is overestimated when we rely on ship track data. Ship tracks are simply too short-lived to provide the correct estimate of cloud brightening. The reason for this is that ship track data don't account for the reduced cloud thickness that occurs in widespread pollution. To properly quantify these effects and get better climate projections, we need to improve the way clouds are represented in climate models. The study also has implications in the context of climate geoengineering. Climate engineering denotes targeted, so far mostly hypothetical, interventions into the climate system, with the goal of alleviating the consequences of climate change. One example of climate engineering method is the deliberate brightening of clouds through targeted emissions of sea salt aerosols. Peter Wadhams talks about that all the time, one of his pet projects, known as marine cloud brightening. Our results show that even in terms of cloud physics, marine cloud brightening may not be as straightforward as it may seem. A naive implementation could even result in cloud darkening and the opposite of what was intended. We certainly have to do a lot more research on the feasibility and risks of such methods. There's still a lot to learn.
Of course there is.
How these tiny aerosol particles influence clouds and eventually climate. So those articles seem like they are opposed, but when you look at them, one is in the deep blue sea, and they're talking about ship tracks, and they're talking about marine cloud brightening and cloud thinning and things like that. But we don't live in the deep blue sea. So that's very interesting. I think it's very interesting, and it has to be gone through. But we live in suburbia, in cities, on land by and large. Maybe a couple of people live in ships, but we live on land for the most part. And on land, they found that actually the COVID-19 lockdowns in the cities and the more particulation was part of the environment originally, and the more particulation that went away, the hotter it got. So the cities got up to a third of a degree Celsius hotter, which was absolutely huge. Insane. And nobody's denying that.
Hi, Jean. Somebody just joined us. I want to say Jean and Schutze and Kate and Ercone. Good. We have a nice group tonight. Jennifer, to me, it's all pretty fascinating stuff. And the National Climate Center for Atmospheric Research they're pretty well respected, and I expect that we're going to see more research on this as time goes on, and especially if countries decide to have more stringent lockdowns. But I don't know if I see that coming or not with this vaccine and all that. But for us, we are interested in the data that comes out of the time that not as much stuff is in the atmosphere, the gook. So it is fascinating. Of course, the layperson doesn't think about this, but we all do.
Because we're nerds. Better. We love it. We love it.
Yeah. And so, guys, what we're going to do is go on to the conversation, which also had an interesting article in this whole genre. And this one was done. Let me look and see it was last year, Jen. The conversation. Let me pull this up for everybody to see. And this one was done while
October
lockdown
22nd.
Had little to no effect on global temperatures. Well, and
this was 6 months into lockdown. If you think that lockdown kind of started around March, something like that, October. So this is like 6 months into lockdown. So it happened about 3.5 months ago or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while we won't read the whole thing, I think it's interesting, Jen, if you want to just highlight the pieces that make it compelling enough that the conversation published it. Because it's not actually,
absolutely.
It's more, this is a
so essentially look. 1/3 of the world's population was on lockdown at the time of this writing. Mm-hmm. And around the world, car travel fell by about 50%. The number of flights plummeted by 75%. And industrial activity fell to around 35%. So everybody's like grounded, nobody's driving, but a lot of greenhouse gases fell, obviously, because we weren't pumping them in, at least the rate of putting them into the atmosphere. Some of the industrial activities that shut down, particularly heavy industry, including steel and cement, also produced aerosols. So you got to remember how toxic cement is, and of course, making steel, which we make our cities out of. So that really kind of shut down a lot too. So in this new research, they show that lockdown had a negligible effect on global temperatures. So that's pretty interesting. Sulfur dioxide is the gas that's mainly produced in the industrial processes that burn coal. So when you think about making steel or the toxicity of cement, that is very sulfur dioxide intensive. And these particles offset some of the heat caused by greenhouse gases, such as CO2, because it reflects sunlight back into space. And this is, of course, as we know, called global dimming. So they're just saying that since soot is black, it absorbs sunlight and heats the atmosphere. So that actually heats the atmosphere. So different things do different things, right? Different substances do different things.
And that's why
Cars
this is so contentious to people that don't know.
That's right. Because it's complicated. There are so many interlocking feedbacks. Some things cool the atmosphere, some things warm the atmosphere. And cars and airplanes also emit a lot of nitrogen oxide, and that actually makes ozone in the lower atmosphere. So that actually warms the planet. So there's all these very complicated things. Satellite images in March and April showed a huge reduction in nitrous oxide over Europe as lockdowns came into force. They ran computer model simulations of the atmosphere during lockdown, and they compared it to what would have been expected if the pandemic had never happened. Then they fed that data back into the model for the best estimates of how much emissions of sulfur dioxide, black carbon, nitrous oxide fell from industry, transport, and aircraft for the period between mid-February and mid-June. So they're just taking like a couple of months into it. This very early lockdown. Their model simulation showed that reductions of these different pollutants had a small and temporary influence on the climate overall, due in part to their opposing effects. As we were saying, one thing does this, another thing does this, and sometimes they just plain old cancel each other out.
Yeah.
And it says it may sound like a dull conclusion, but it has important lessons. Let's see here. The global average temperature saw little change, but there were regional variations. The Middle East was cooler since less black carbon. You think what they do in the Middle East, they're just pumping oil all the time and burning it and everything like that. So less black carbon in the air meant the highly reflective desert sand could send more solar energy back out into space. Other regions, such as Eastern China, saw more heating overall, as they had some of the largest reductions in industrial sulfur dioxide emissions. So the lockdown offered an invaluable test for theories about how pollutants affect the climate. So they say that with this information, they'll be able to make better models and better predictions.
Which we saw, which we're seeing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Their net, only a decisive shift from fossil fuels will stabilize global temperatures. And that's why they say that reviving economic growth post COVID-19 will be pivotal. And let's see. I think that's pretty much it. But you can see there's a lot of different things that come into it.
Well, yeah. And we shall see, I think, a lot more on this to come. I do.
Yeah.
I believe we will.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to me. And I am the layperson. And I've done shows on my own on this topic before years ago. And it's always been a topic that, people don't, I don't know what the problem with the term is, but whatever. We're here and we're talking
Yeah.
about it. And I thought it was great, Jennifer, that you had brought this to my attention so that we could talk about it.
Yeah. Well, we've wanted to do a show on global dimming and the effect of COVID lockdown and global dimming and how did it affect temperatures and basically what was going on. And the answer is complicated. It's yes and no.
Yeah.
It's complicated and it depends where you are. But I think net, you can safely say that if you're in the mid to upper latitudes, which is basically kind of the latitude is where we are in the United States and
Yeah.
slightly above, right?
Yeah.
And, you can expect it to get a little bit hotter, especially in the city during the time when emissions aren't pouring into the atmosphere. I think net, we can safely say that.
Well, there you go. Well, I see that it's time for us to move on. Now we're going to go a little bit of a different direction, but it's still, we're moving to the Arctic. And this is from Motherboard Vice, an interesting article that does talk about, well, of course, are they never? They're always worried. But this is some research, and these are Russian, well, really world researchers, but Russian based. And the last 40 days in the fall, they did an expedition that collected samples that confirm the thaw. I mean, they're saying it's confirming the thaw of permafrost. So let's dive in and see what Vice got out of this from February 2nd. Here we go. We're seeing they're off the big ship getting their samples. And the Laptev Sea, which lies north of Siberia, and Jennifer and I talk about this area quite a bit on our shows, is sometimes called an ice factory or the birthplace of ice because it is a major source of Arctic sea ice. And I got to make sure. Okay, sorry guys. I just the chilly Russian Sea, which normally starts to freeze in autumn, pumps hundreds of thousands of square miles into the Arctic Ocean over the winter. Now, last year, following a historic heat wave, which we all talked about, the historic heat waves over the Siberia, the Laptev Sea did not freeze in October for the first time on record. Very serious stuff. And its ice production in November was unusually sluggish. And this is according to NASA. Now, these are the scientists. This is Evgeny Shevelin, a geoscientist at the Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology, which is called short for Skoltech, in Moscow, Russia. They witnessed these weird conditions firsthand from September 26th to November 4th. Shevelin led a scientific expedition across the Laptev Sea, as well as the neighboring Kara and East Siberian seas, to collect sediment samples from the seafloor. Now, the international team of researchers was able to travel more than 900 miles, that's a lot of territory, from the Siberian coast, departing and returning from the port of Arkhangelsk. And they also call it Archangel to make it easier. I did a little research on the background of these places. The lack of ice conditions allowed the expedition to research the Arctic seas greatly from the coast up to the continental shelf, Shevelin said in an email. While the absence of sea ice was striking, Shevelin and his colleagues were most interested in the murky environment within the Arctic continental shelf, located deep under the waves and even the seafloor. The team had set out to study permafrost, that layer of frozen earth, or what Jennifer calls permamush, within the submerged shelf. Now, rich in organic carbons, permafrost has become that oh so important factor in the models of climate change because it releases greenhouse gases as it thaws. And which scientists, they worry that this is going to trigger the feedback loop that will amplify global warming. I think it is already happening. But during the expedition, the Schoelles team collected cores of the Arctic seafloor at depths ranging from 20 to 400 meters, which were brought back to Schoelles Center for Hydrocarbon Recovery for analysis. Now, the data is still being processed and compiled into a research paper. The preliminary results show that the subsea permafrost is in a state of progressive degradation, and that can undoubtedly be related to global climate change, which we know. The reduction in the area of sea ice increases wave activity. Storms occur, which leads to an active mixing of water masses up to a depth of 40 to 50 meters, he explained. All of these parameters accelerate degradation of subsea permafrost, and they contribute to the release of methane into the atmosphere that is soluble in seawater, and methane contained in the bottom sediments. And there's a picture of the team. Isn't that cool? There's the team, guys.
It's
And
really cool.
yeah, it is. I give them so much credit. They're doing the work that needs to be done so much. The troubling trend corroborates similar findings about the rapid thaw of permafrost on land, a problem that has put many Arctic communities at risk of significant infrastructure change. Now, while the degradation of both types of permafrost is concerning, far less is known about subsea permafrost since it is more difficult to access and study, which is one of the motivations for the recent expedition. While the cores collected by the team did not contain subsea permafrost, Schoelles said it would take special parametric drilling to reach that layer. The bottom sediments still revealed plenty of evidence for subsea permafrost thaw. There was no drilling during the expedition because the permafrost upper boundaries are located deeper than the bottom, so it was not directly tested. Still, numerous geophysical data were obtained that show the permafrost roof and the contours of its distribution under the sea. The geophysical data, it's still being processed, and soon these new results will be presented to the scientific community. Yay! We can't wait. Right? I know. We can't wait for this stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's still also from the Polar Stern, more research from them. But given how little is known about subsea permafrost, it is difficult to estimate the volume of greenhouse gas under this underwater layer, will belch out over the coming decades as global temperatures continue to rise. This type of permafrost is quite distinct from its counterpart on land. So it will be important to understand its unique composition, distribution, and behavior in order to model the impact of its degradation on the global climate. So to that end, the Schoelles team plans to conduct more Arctic marine expeditions, with the interdisciplinary specialists who can shed light on the hidden shift that is happening in this remote shelf and its role in the climate of the future. So first of all, it's necessary to thoroughly study these processes and understand the mechanisms and role of various factors in these changes. Schoelles concluded, this requires significant material and intellectual resources and the joint efforts of scientists and specialists from various countries in this direction. And I want to say something about this. Politics aside, scientists don't give a shit about country boundaries. They work together. They work together because that is how the discipline works. One country cannot go alone without other countries together. And Russian scientists are some of the best. And we work with them beautifully. Our country works with them beautifully. And it is in our best interest to always remain doing that. And it's the same with other countries, China as well, other countries, the researchers. It's critical we all work together on these issues. And that is my little,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And good for Vice, right? For
Yeah,
putting this
because
article together
absolutely.
and highlighting basically that their ice factory is very compromised by the late freeze and the low production of Arctic sea ice in general coming from the Lapp Sea. And the methane stores that are locked within the permafrost in the Siberian Arctic shelf. And, just kind of highlighting it so people can start to think of it, become aware of it, and understand it's a very, very complex issue. That is for sure.
Yeah. And I was happy to find that you found this. This was a really good find, I thought. A great find. And it kind of segues us into the last article tonight because we have been talking about Norilsk and Nornickel. We've talked about that huge oil spill on the Arctic tundra several times. It was something I'm going to tell you, Jen, I had dreams about it. These spills and all these things that happen, I mean, it's the stuff of nightmares because of the ecosystems that get destroyed, disturbed, and
Mhm.
people don't think about that in Russia. Oh, Siberia, it's called, blah, blah, but it doesn't. There's ecosystems everywhere. So why
And
don't we
and
tag team this one? Yeah.
the Arctic ecosystems are even more fragile than most ecosystems. They're extremely sensitive, and dumping a giant, tank of diesel into, the
Ugh,
rivers and getting it
just
pushed into the Arctic
horrible.
Sea, that's going to have a huge effect. And it's very interesting that these guys are actually getting fined
I mean,
1.62 billion euros for this huge oil spill in the Arctic
yeah, that,
tundra.
as I showed earlier, that is 1,950,520,500 bucks in American. That's a hefty fine, but it does not matter because it still doesn't address. Money is never going to make these vulnerable wetlands, rivers, and lakes better. It's just not. But
Yeah.
what it will do is it will tell these companies that nobody's fucking around anymore and this shit can't happen anymore. So why don't we go in? Why don't we tag team on this one? What do you say?
Okay.
All right, we're
Sounds
going to
good.
tag team, and I'll start out with this one. I'll pull it up, and we're going to tag team on it. This judges at the Krasnoyarsk Court of Arbitration on the 5th of February announced their verdict in the case against the Norilsk Timursky Energy Company. The company that is owned and managed by the mining and metallurgy giant Nornickel will have to pay, and I just read how much. I mean, a lot of rubles for the grave environmental damage inflicted on nature in the Tamar region. It was Russia's Environmental Protection Agency, Rospernadzor. Wait, I studied this one, Jennifer. Rospernadzor. Okay, Rospernadzor. Sorry, guys, we do this every show, but I studied this and I still couldn't get this one. I give Russians a lot of credit for their language. That sued the company after more than the 21,000 tons of diesel fuel in late May 2020 leaked from that ruptured oil reservoir. And remember, we did a whole show on this, and it was
Several shows.
yeah, several shows, but the original one I remember because I couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
All I kept thinking was the damage. And, you think about the Deepwater Horizon and you think about all these predecessors and all this mess. And it's just like, it seems like no matter what they're fined and what happens, it doesn't stop. It just happens again and again. And that's why I guess I get nervous with nuclear because a Chernobyl and what happened in Japan. I mean, what's the next one going to be? And people can scream at me and say, "Oh, Sandy, if we have to get off fossil fuels, so nuclear energy is clean energy and James Hansen blah blah." It doesn't matter because it just takes one accident. So that is just my little offshoot on this one. So Jen, you want to take it away
Sure.
and you try. We'll just call this ROSP.
Yeah, let's call it ROSP. ROSP and its leader, Svetlana Rodionova, originally demanded almost 148 billion rubles.
Woo!
Nornickel and its subsidiary, however, soon disputed the claim and argued that damage was worth only 21.4 billion rubles, which equates to 238 million. So they were trying to bargain it
Of
down. The
course.
court case
The
started
lawyers.
in early October. Nornickel is fined for damages to soil and pollution of waterways, as well as for negligence for violation of environmental regulations in industrial production. Svetlana Rodionova is content with the verdict. I am confident that this money will be spent on solving environmental problems, she said in a statement. According to the newspaper, Kommersant, practically the whole sum, 145.5 billion rubles, will be included in the federal budget, while the minor sum of 685,000 rubles will be included in the budget for Norilsk. In a statement, Nornickel says it will carefully study the verdict. It is not clear if the company will file an appeal. Previously, the company has argued that the fine must be included not in the federal treasury, but in the regional budget of Krasnoyarsk. The fine is Thank
Krasnoyarsk.
you. Thank you for rescuing me. The fine is unprecedented in Russia and must be seen as a strong signal to the company's powerful producer of nickel, copper, palladium, and platinum. It is a strike against the company, but company shareholder and CEO Vladimir Putin will have no major problems finding the required
Wow.
money. And
And
look
look
at
at that
this
picture.
huge leak just
Disgusting.
going right into the river and pouring straight into
I
the
wonder if I
Arctic
could make
Ocean.
that bigger. No, it doesn't. It's disgusting.
In
Mm.
2018, Nornickel cashed out as much as $3.7 billion of dividends to its company shareholders. Piece of shit. Piece of shit. Among them, surprise, surprise, Vladimir Putin himself.
Yeah, well, they're an oligarchy
Nornickel,
is worse than we are.
bunch of crooks. Nornickel has now convinced shareholders that dividends for the first 9 months of 2020 will be reduced to 98.64 billion rubles. That's 1 billion euros. This is less than half the sum paid to the owner same period in 2019. The cut in dividends has not been well perceived by key shareholders. Rusal and its owner Oleg
You
Deripaska,
know where that name
Forbes
comes from.
report.
That
Yes,
guy. Yes, you do,
yes,
because
he
that
was
guy was
all over
involved.
because yes, he was
He
all
was
over.
involved in our
Oleg
shit.
Deripaska, you heard about him all
Hmm.
last year, all the year
Yep.
before. By the way, I'm a big Rachel Maddow devotee in a way. I love Rachel Maddow. She did some huge exposés on Oleg Deripaska.
Be careful,
It
we'll
was
be
long
accused of Russiagate.
it was long believed that climate change was the reason for the oil spill. Yeah, think. Well, it was on permafrost, which became permarush.
Permamush.
Tank kind of caved over. According to Nornickel and a number of environmental experts, the ground under the oil reservoir collapsed following the melting of permafrost. However,
Mhm.
federal inspectors have later rebuffed that theory. Why? Why did they
I don't
rebuff
know.
that theory? It's not a freaking theory, it's a fact. It's a fact. I'm sorry, stuff like this makes me crazy, right?
Of course
The
it
oil
does.
reservoir ruptured because of construction errors and mismanagement by the oil company. Well, there may have been mismanagement, but there was also melting of permafrost. Well,
Yeah.
melting's not the right word, thawing.
Thawing.
Thawing of
Thawing.
permafrost,
Right.
right?
It's not melting, it's
By the
thawing.
company, experts from the state technical control authority, whatever, conclude. Nornickel is from before known as one of the worst polluters in all of Russia. Over
Ooh.
several decades, the vulnerable Arctic lands surrounding the company plants in Timor have been subject to heavy pollution. In 2018, a total of 1.9 million tons of sulfur dioxide were emitted from the chimneys of Norilsk. That was by far the biggest sulfur dioxide emissions in the world.
Ugh.
I wonder how global dimming is affecting their situation if they had to kind of cut
Right.
down, right?
Oh my.
In addition comes serious pollution of local soil and waterways. Do you want to take it from here, Sandy?
Sure.
Nornickel
Let
is
me find it.
also a major polluter in the Kola Peninsula.
Yep. And the environmental situation around Norilsk has sparked outcry from not only locals and environmentalists, but also from top federal politicians. So that's big stuff there. In October 2020, leader of the Federation Council, Valentina Matvienko, expresses shock and outrage about company mismanagement
Shocked, I tell
and
you, shocked.
shocked, I tell you. Ooh. In a press conference, Matvienko said the company town, oh, we're going to talk about company towns after this, of Norilsk used to be a garden town, but now looks more
Oh,
like a slum with worn out infrastructure and power grids, water canal canalization, roads, and housing in disarray. The vocal attack of the company did not only aim at Nornickel's recent huge spill, but also at the company's general practices. Oligarchy. Oligarchy. According to the longtime speaker of the parliament body, Nornickel has put on display complete cynicism, the total indifference towards the motherland where they live and make huge money. She also accused managers of Nornickel of grave corruption. Holy shit, she's still alive.
That's right.
The
That's
company
right.
is bribing both
Yeah, right.
local and regional legislators and have their people in control over the Norilsk town budget. And let me tell you why I'm bringing this up really quickly about company towns. Because there is in Nevada, I believe it's Nevada, there, and I don't know what company it is. It's just off the top of my head. They're talking about letting these corporations run these towns. Never a good idea. It is never a good
No.
idea. And I'm going to tell you, we are definitely going to give a big one to Norilsk, to them. They suck. So, Nornickel, there, you get the environmental coffee house flush because that's definitely, you guys suck. They suck. But it's
They
just, you know
totally
what, Jen,
suck.
though? It's a good thing though that at least there are people um in Russia that have an environmental, a bend. And for her to come out and people to come out and talk like this, that's kind of dangerous in Russia because of
It
they are an
is.
oligarchy and people have been
Right.
hurt very badly for this kind of stuff. And it's not that much different than the United States at times because we're slip sliding into certain directions. I mean, we're an oligarchy too. And just by the fact that company towns exist or people want to have company towns, like Karen just said, anyone remember mining towns? Yeah, of course we remember mining towns. And they were horrible. And they were probably company towns. But it's very interesting that she called it that, in
Yeah.
in this. But boy, we were incensed
Well,
when
it
this
is it
news.
is it's a total example of a company town because everybody there is working for the company in
Yeah,
one way or
right.
another. Because there's no real good reason to go live in Norilsk unless you just want to skinny dip in the freaking,
Or research.
I don't know what the river is there, but I
Or do
mean,
research, Siberian
yeah.
Arctic research. But
It's a
yes.
rough place to live. It's a rough, cold, and dirty place to live. And now it's trashed. It's totally trashed with rusty infrastructure on thawing permafrost. What could possibly go wrong?
What could, ugh. And it went wrong. And the thing that will happen is it will go wrong again. Okay. So
Guaranteed.
we've been here for 55 minutes. I think that this has been a really good show. Uh I wonder, Jen, if there's anything you want to discuss while we, as we wrap up.
Well, climate change is so complex and there's so many different things to take into consideration. And you just got to dive in and try and grapple with it and understand all the effects that are happening because of climate change and what the effects of global dimming are, what the effects of lockdown are, and put it all together and just be a little bit of a Nancy Drew, connect all the dots and just keep looking.
Yeah. And we've got some comments. You're right, Jen. Um, Everybody's into the company town. Hi, Suzanne. Thank you for being here with us. Anybody have any questions for us before we say goodbye? We really appreciate you all for coming. It has been a good show. I was really stoked to do this tonight, Jen. We really needed
Yeah, me
to.
too.
Hey, Rick. Well, let's say hello to a few people before we end, and we have somebody named Tiger Dharma, and he says the market system is death. Well, I kind of agree there. I mean, it is. And Jean, thank you. And hi, frustrated atheist and interglacial optimist. Yeah, we Karen says the dots are connected because of us. Well, not okay. Thank you. We'll take that.
Well,
We will
it's our
take that.
passion. We just like
Yeah.
to look at it, and we know that you guys all love to look at it too, so we look at this together.
Oh, and I love the fact that we have a lot of females with us and friends from, hi, Dan from Nicole Sandler's show, where I'm a mod every day at 5 o'clock. And Rebecca, thank you for addressing the first two articles. Absolutely. They were important. They were important to talk about. All right. Well, listen, it's been a great night, guys. I want to thank you all for coming. Jennifer, it's always great to do shows with you. I just absolutely love it.
Likewise, I feel the
And
same way. I love
yeah,
our synastry.
I do too. I do too. All right. Well, stay tuned because we have our little goodbye video. And peace out, everyone. Till next Sunday, I will be live. And oh, I can't forget this. I will be live on Tuesday night for my Tuesday night show. I can't tell you what interviews are coming up as of yet, but I know we'll be doing another State of the Planet. I know we'll be doing another show with Science Talk with Jim Massa. I mean, we'll get our schedule together and we'll let you all know. We really, really love you guys. Thank you. Thank you.